Hi everybody, it's Tahir here from Oderbach Permaculture Farm, and we are going to step into part 2 of our deep exploration of the 12 permaculture principles. And like the first part, we're going to look at each principle in turn, define the principle, look at its meaning in terms of the broader permaculture concept, how to apply it in permaculture design, and how it will relate to the other 11 principles. Okay, so let's get stuck in. Alright, we're going to continue the exploration of the 12 permaculture principles, and we're going to take a look at principle number 6, use small and slow solutions. The adage there, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And this principle is all about scaling down and intensification. All right, and it is a direct response to the dysfunctionality and the out of order nature of our global economy, our global society, where we see multinational corporations, industrial agriculture, mega cities becoming the norm. All right, and these are not systems and infrastructures that work on a human scale by any means. They're faceless, they're mechanical, and they don't serve primary human needs. They are systems of corporate centralization. And so this principle in permaculture is all about designing small-scale intensive systems that function on a human scale and capacity. Okay, because this is what we need to do if we're going to develop a free and regenerative society. We've got to break down this huge, monstrous behemoth of centralization of power and wealth and bring it back down to a distributed and localized level. All right, and this principle addresses that directly. And by nature, permaculture systems are as small scale and concentrated as possible. All right, so they are designed to function at the smallest scale that is practical and energy efficient for that particular function, whether it is food production or housing or settlement. You get to a certain scale or size and you go beyond the level that humans can constructively engage with each other in a meaningful way and have control over their lives and all aspects of their lives. You know, and we can see this in the application of permaculture into settlement planning. There's a really good book called Eco-Cities by Richard Register that goes into that, and he basically states once a settlement gets beyond 5,000 people, it loses its human scale, and therefore from that point onwards a new one needs to be developed. All right, and so that's quite a radical term, because you know we've got cities that have over 25 million people, but living in those cities is hell. It is a very low quality of life. All right. And so permaculture design focuses on intensification and diversification of systems rather than systems of scale. And they are far more productive per square meter as a result. They utilize the resources of the natural and human world far more efficiently and allow for much higher levels of surplus. Okay, and we see that in the tiny house movement, which is a very intelligent response to homelessness. And here we've got an excellent model of frugality. It's also an application of that principle of apply self-regulation and accept feedback. And the concept there is, at the end of the day, what are your real needs and how do we meet them? All right. And there's a saying by Masanobu Fukioka, and that is, do not ask what you need to do, ask what you do not need to do. Okay, because often we do too much. We have too much because we think we need it, because we're not asking that question, is this necessary? And this principle is all about getting down to the core, all right, and making that core as efficient and effective as possible before we think of expanding. And this beautiful little living environment has everything that the person needs who lives in it to have a high quality of life: food, water, heating, shelter. Okay, the footprint is really small, and so the resource utilization is small, and so therefore its consumption levels are very low. So what we know is beyond a certain scale and intensity, productivity drops off per square meter, and research has shown that from a family's ability to manage land efficiently and effectively, once you get beyond a hectare, you start to lose the ability to manage the land to its optimum potential. All right, and this is the problem with mainstream agriculture. These vast mechanized farms are not efficient utilizers of the mineral cycle and the water cycle, and they do not bring about a highly diversified, multi-layered, extremely efficient sunlight harvesting and conversion system. All right, so this concept of the hectare model being the most efficient, we term the hectic hectare. All right, and it really does boil down to numbers of people. So when it gets to a family, the most efficient size that is not only highly productive but economically viable is this 1 hectare model. And so, you know, you can take 10 hectares and give it to one family, and they can farm it, and they can use mainstream agricultural methods, or they could even use permaculture techniques. They will never, ever be as productive on that 10 hectares if that 10 hectares was divided up into 10 1-hectare family farms, all right? And so what we are looking at here is how to use the resources of the world in the most efficient way possible that will engage the most people possible. And we can see here in this image, this is what a permaculture farm or permaculture system looks like. Very intensive, highly diverse, structured and stacked per square meter, very productive. And this principle is reflected in the concept of start at your doorstep, all right? Establish a working system, one that once you get going and you master it, will support with excess resources the next step or the next level of implementation, okay? And if that next level of implementation doesn't work out so well and it collapses, you fall back on something that is working well, that forms the anchor of your system, all right? And that's resilience, okay? And this is the concept of small and slow solutions, taking things one step at a time, getting the first step well established, working well, and using that to form the platform for the next, all right? And if you get things wrong, it's not a catastrophic failure. And this is where the term, the bigger they are, the harder they fall, comes in. If you go full throttle, implement large-scale systems with high amounts of financial investment, and they don't work, the impact is catastrophic. And we see this all over the world, especially within NGOs, within failed corporate business endeavors. Government projects are a classic example. All right, and here's a wonderful example of start at your doorstep. This person has been extremely efficient with the space they have, and they don't even have soil yet. They are highly productive. And the quality of their life will improve by virtue of this little system they've put there. You know, in terms of microclimate, in terms of the range of healthy supplements to their diet, in terms of the learning that they will receive from engaging with a small system, and the beauty of it, living in that, surrounded by vegetation rather than brick. So one of the primary ways we intensify land use per square meter is what we call the layering of production. And layering of systems involves putting together plant species in a way whereby they utilize all the incoming light to the optimum level. So your top layer will be your larger trees that enjoy full sun, and then sitting under that will be different layers of vegetation that can make efficient use of ever decreasing levels of light. Okay, and so you've got production on multiple levels. You have a forest ecosystem. Okay, and per square meter it is exceptionally productive, and it's perennial, so it's producing all year round. Okay, and once it's established, it no longer needs the kickstart at the beginning of every season. It's there, and that's the value of trees. We also select species for high value. All right, so like we saw with the integrate, don't segregate principle, where we bring in elements that are multifunctional, we also try and ensure that that multifunctionality has high value in terms of either its return into your system or its economic value. And here's a very good example of cannabis, which per square meter is the highest value crop on earth. And so you don't need to put large amounts of land under cultivation in order to generate a healthy income. You can use a very small footstep and generate a huge financial return. All right. The legal issues with cannabis production globally have got nothing to do with the value of the plant itself. Okay, and in countries where they've legalized the commercial cultivation of this plant for medicine and recreational purposes, have shown unequivocally the immense financial value that this plant contributes, not only to the growers and the processes of the plant, but to the broader economy that they exist in. All right, and so the idea is that what elements can we put in our system that use the least space, need the least input, and produce the highest surplus or output value. Okay, because that is going to enable us to function in a more compact and manageable way. So the principle has a design aspect which focuses on designing compact, diverse, and intense systems that self-regulate, okay, in relation to their context, because each context is different, so each system will be different. And their first objective is self-reliance, to provide the resources we need to live a high quality of life. And when surplus is achieved, that surplus goes on to the marketplace. So we're not making the mistake a lot of farmers make, where they have hundreds of hectares under production, and all of that goes to the co-op and sold onto the marketplace in return for cash, and then they take that cash to the local supermarket and they buy low-grade food. All right, food is the most important input in your life. If you're eating homegrown, nutrient-dense food, you are going to be healthy, and your health is the most important thing, because you are unable to function effectively without it. Okay, and it brings us back to that principle of care for the people, self-care. Homegrown food is central to self-care. All right. And then the slow part of the principle is all about the speed of movement of materials and people through systems, okay, and other living things. And good design minimizes that, because if resources are moving quickly, you cannot harvest them. And you can look at a river, for example, where you find fast-flowing streams. There's very little life in that. Okay, but where the streams slow down and they pool and they eddy and they form lakes, that is where life proliferates. And so in permaculture design, our idea is to slow, spread, and sink the resources of nature into the system so they can do the most work before they leave. All right. And so we need to slow things down so that we can yield from them. And one way we do this effectively is through pilot projects. Okay. So this principle of small, slow solutions has a management or implementation aspect, whereby systems are developed on a small scale first, and they are tested for effectiveness through feedback we get from them in their engagement with the real world. And if they give us a positive feedback, we scale up. All right, and here's a good example of a pasture chicken system, where the chickens are fed on pasture and they are harvested for meat and eggs. Okay, and it all starts with one unit. All right, and that one unit is tested for viability. We can see what it's going to take to manage such a system, what the costs involved in establishing such a system, the impact it has on the pasture system in terms of fertility and the health of the chicken and so on, and then it gives us a very clear idea how to scale up. So we are scaling up with good data and information in the local context, and so the chances of failure are virtually nothing. Okay, and this is how we develop good production systems and good businesses. Okay, and again, this is where the adage of the bigger they are, the harder they fall, it comes into play. We don't know the dynamics of a lot of the things that we design until we put them in place. And so by good design, we can minimize what we call type 1 errors, catastrophic mistakes. But we still don't actually know what will happen until things are put in place and interface with the real world and we get the feedback. Okay, and that's, again, that applies self-regulation and accept feedback principle, the principle of observe and interact. All right, and so it's far more effective over time to start small, consolidate, develop information, and expand based on that. You will find over a longer period of time, you will accelerate your development a lot quicker than going big straight away and making big mistakes and having to fall back to zero again. Okay, so there's an inherent wisdom in this principle. On a broader level, when we're dealing with how we design our society and how we engage with it, this principle speaks to localization, okay? And it is central to localization of production and consumption, and it reflects on conscious action as well, whereby we support small-scale businesses, okay? Because they generally have a local grounding. They are empowering and employing local people, and the money from those businesses stays in the local economy and grows the quality of life of local people. So we apply this principle in the way that we engage economically with others. We try and support localization. The moment we start channeling money into franchises and multinationals, what we see at the end of the day is a rapid departure of wealth from the community. And often the people who run those organizations or those businesses are not local at all, they are brought in. Okay. So the next principle is creatively use and respond to change. And it's all about using and accelerating successional processes. And the vision is not seeing things as they are, but as they will be. All right. And so this particular principle focuses on designing for flexibility and responsiveness to change in the world, and how to design systems to evolve and regenerate from simple into complex human life support systems. Okay, so this is all about working with that natural principle of succession, all right, and getting our systems to reflect that and to function in that process rather than fight it. Okay. So ecological succession, which we talked about a bit in the permaculture context, is the process that ecosystems go through where the process of ecology will develop an environment that is very simple, like exposed rocks, into a highly complex, well-structured forest ecosystem over time. And it does it through a process of what we call pioneering, whereby we'll have exposed land, and there'll be very, very hardy elements that will come in and they'll start to change that exposed landscape and soften it up. Okay? And generally they will be initially your pioneer elements like lichens and mosses and annual weeds that are very fast growing and will set seed very quickly and provide some kind of buffer land cover to protect the soil and to enhance moisture retention and improve the mineral and water cycle. And as soon as that improves, more life can take hold and the system becomes more complex and stable over time, and eventually get the highest expression of ecosystems which is forest, which is the most efficient use of natural resources per square meter. All right. And all natural systems are following this trajectory. Okay. And so in permaculture, we take this principle of succession and we apply it to our system design and development. Okay. And we speed it up. So instead of working on a natural time scale or a geological time scale, we achieve this in the space of a few years by good design. All right. And this is the concept of regeneration, which we touched on in the permaculture context. Okay, because if we can apply succession effectively, all right, it embeds our permaculture system into the natural ecosystem process of succession, where our systems would evolve from very simple input-driven processes into highly complex, stable, and productive processes that generate more energy and resources than they use, okay, to provide for their self-regulatory needs or sustenance. And so there will be a surplus which you can use to consume, to market, and to put back into the system to keep that process of evolution going. And so this is what nature is doing. So why fight it? Because mainstream agriculture fights it. Mainstream agriculture tries to reverse succession back down to simple, annual, weed level systems. Okay. And to do that, it requires pesticides, it requires fertilizers, it requires machinery. It's an onslaught on the natural tendency of ecological systems to evolve. And the moment you stop that onslaught, nature starts to take hold again. And the process of succession begins with weeds, with the input of all sorts of wildlife. And those may not be compatible with the production goal of an industrial farming operation. Okay, so it needs this huge amount of external inputs to hold down the natural vortex of succession. So it's like holding down a spring, compressing a spring. It takes a lot of force, a lot of energy, and if you let it go, it jumps back. Well, in permaculture, we say, no, we're not doing that. We're doing the opposite. We're going to enhance this process of succession to our advantage. And we're going to use the principles of succession in the design and evolution of our permaculture systems towards highly productive forest archetypes. Okay. And so here we see it. This is a permaculture system. It's food forest based. And you can see the difference between it and the surrounding dysfunctional landscape, which is constantly mowed, constantly grazed, constantly sprayed to hold it down to this very simple pioneer level of existence. It takes a huge amount of resource. While this system is saying, let nature take its course. Let's work with nature rather than against her. Let's develop multi-layered, highly diverse forest archetype systems. And let's do it in a fraction of the time that natural systems would take. And this is what good design enables, and proper management. A system like this can be established in 10 years. No problem. All right? Because we are working with the release of the spring energy. Okay. And so permaculture systems are always evolving by design. We do not go through this endlessly repeating cycle of oversimplified annual plant growth and in the context of a sanitized soil environment year in and year out, where we plant annuals and we harvest annuals and we leave the soil bare until the next season. And in that time we spray Roundup to keep the weeds under control, and we pump fertilizers, or we put in organic composts. It doesn't matter. The point is how the system functions. So organic farming is no different to mainstream industrial farming, other than the nature of the inputs are organic rather than synthetic. But you are still using herbicides. You are still using pesticides. You are still using fertilizers. You still have an input-driven system that does not self-regulate and does not function in the ecosystem processes. And permaculture is different by design in the sense that it creates an ecosystemic process that naturally evolves into highly complex, stable, productive ecosystems that are forest-based. So we apply this principle into our systems to respond to micro and macro changes in context. All right, because reality is never the same. Every moment is different. Okay. And so we design systems that work with the constant shifts and changes in the natural order. Okay, and multi-species systems respond better to change because there are choices in yield and diversity of ecosystem services that support the growth of the system. They are responsive to the ecological order because they are part of the ecological order. They are integrated into the ecological order, and so they can shift and change with the shifts and changes of the natural order around them, seasonally, through the day, climatically. They're much more resilient. Okay. So, vision is not seeing things as they are, but as they will be, is essential to this principle. It's about being able to see potential in an environment. And permaculture design is all about seeing potential and designing that potential and giving you a pathway to reach that potential. Okay, so we need to be able to see systems in their future evolution. That's vision. And Buckminster Fuller, as I mentioned before, had a saying, how do you predict the future? You design it. Okay. And so good permaculture design takes the current moment and expands it into the future by showing you the potentials and possibilities of yourself in the space that you have responsibility for. And we're not going to limit that through some kind of dogma or negative thought process that you may have now. You may say to yourself, well, I don't have the money to implement such a system. Well, you might have the money to take the first step. All right, you might have the time and energy to take the first step, and by taking that first step, it opens up further potential, which generates more time and generates more opportunity and generates more finance to enable the system to evolve. All right, so it's all about opening ourselves up to a much higher quality life. It's about opening ourselves up to abundance. So the next principle is use and value renewable resources and services. Let nature take its course. Okay, and this is about permaculture being embedded in the natural order, and the basic resources and energy systems of permaculture are renewable. Okay, and renewable resources are resources that are replaced by natural processes over reasonable periods of time without major non-renewable inputs. Okay, and our most fundamental renewable resource is the soil. It's the base of the trophic pyramid, and so the whole system of the permaculture trophic pyramid is grounded in the soil. And so renewable resources should be seen as our sources of income, okay? While non-renewables should be seen as capital assets to be used extremely sparingly towards developing renewable resource processes. So permaculture design aims to make best use of renewable natural resources to not only manage and maintain yields, all right, but form the basis of all yield in the system. Okay, so the entire thing is functioning through an integration of renewable resources in a way that they can provide for each other's needs and generate a surplus. That's that principle of integrate, don't segregate. Okay, and if we use non-renewables, we use them as a means to establish a system, not as a means to maintain and manage a system. Okay, and so we are using non-renewables judiciously. Okay, so we will use, for example, an excavator to dig swales on a production field. Okay, and there may come times, because permaculture is not a dogmatic system, there may come times when you need to use non-renewables to save a situation or to enable a situation. All right. Bill Mollison says in his designer's manual, there was a time where in certain contexts he needed to use chemical fertilizers just to get a system going, because there was just no topsoil, no fertility. And when he put seeds to grow, they didn't germinate, or if they did germinate, they died immediately because there was no nutrient. So by putting a top dress in a fertilizer in with the seeds, it got the seeds up and running, and it started the ecosystem process so that succession could kick in and move from there. Yeah. But you're not using the fertilizer season after season to maintain fertility, and that's the difference. All right. What we are looking at is to utilize non-renewables as efficiently and effectively as possible towards developing self-regulating systems that are grounded in renewables. Okay, and what we call fast carbon pathways. Okay, we're going to explore what a fast carbon pathway is. All right, so a fast carbon pathway is basically a renewable resource that will restore itself over a period of no longer than 7 years. Okay, and so there are many different types of renewable resources that we can use in our system. Okay, there's the renewable resource of water, of soil, of wind, of sun. And then there are also the biologically renewable resources of plants and animals, and again the life in the soil. Okay, and it's how we work with those resources that will determine whether they are renewable or not. Okay, and so the faster a resource can renew itself, the more effective it is. Okay, and so our permaculture systems, we try and select for what we call fast carbon pathways, and there are many different types. Like, for example, bamboo as a building material is a fast carbon pathway. It's the fastest growing plant on earth. You know, you can chop a bamboo shoot down and it will recover fully back to 20 meters high in the space of 3 years. Okay, there's no tree on earth that can do that, and there's no timber from trees that can do as much as bamboo can. Yeah, we see an amazing bamboo structure designed and built in Bali. All right. The faster the carbon pathway, the more productive a system. So that if you can load your system with fast carbon pathways, you're going to have a very fast turnover of resources, and your productivity will increase exponentially very quickly. So like on my farm, my pastures are lucerne based, because lucerne restores itself from hard grazing or cutting in 4 weeks. So you can get multiple harvests every year, and it's extremely nutritious. Okay. Mature fruit trees will provide fruit every year for hundreds of years. The amount of resource needed to produce that fruit is relatively small once the tree is established. An old growth forest is not a renewable resource. Okay, so slow renewables are not renewables. And so really, if it takes longer than 7 years to recover from use, it's not a renewable resource. So we're trying to select elements in the system that renew themselves very quickly. And this proverb of let nature take its course is really focused around the inherent wisdom of nature and biological resources, and to allow them to function without interference in our design, okay, and to learn from them as well. And so what this is saying is stop interfering. Once you've established the ecosystem process on your property, let it go. All right? And trust the process. And we see this often in gardens when you have a pest issue or disease issue in the garden. Oh, quickly spray. Rather sit back and let it run its course, because if you let it run its course, firstly, all the weak and infirm elements will die off, and what remains will be strong and resilient, and you can select that for further expansion of the system. But at the same time, you may find that by allowing pests to run their course in the garden, you allow for the arrival of a predatory element that can establish itself in the garden and bring the whole thing under control in a natural self-regulating way that does not require you to engage with it. Every now and then you will have a crisis, especially when systems are young and they're not self-regulating properly. You will find that certain elements in the system will start taking over, and we manage them carefully through weeding, or say for example collecting snails or integrating ducks into the garden to create a homeostatic balance. But the point is hands off as much as possible. And the next principle, use edges and value the marginal, is a extremely important principle in regards to increasing productivity in a system. Okay. And there's an adage, don't think you're on the right track just because it's a well-beaten path. So it has a practical aspect and an attitudinal aspect, and we'll look at it in a bit more detail. And what this principle is reminding us is to maintain awareness and make uses of edges in reality and margins at all scales in the system. And here we can see example of edges. All right. And so what is an edge? Okay, an edge is a place where two or more environments meet. Okay, and so here we have an example. We've got two environments and they're meeting, and where they meet there's an overlap, and a third environment is created called an ecotone, and that ecotone is a unique system. Not only does it have access to the resources of the two meeting environments, it has its own resources and its own species that are unique to it, but it is what we call a high energy environment. Okay. So our fundamental design objective in relation to this principle is to increase edge in the system. And we see it in nature on all levels. We see it in our guts, we see it in our lungs, we see it in the leaves of a tree, how the leaves increase the solar collecting edge of a tree exponentially over the area the tree covers and forms. All right. So a tree may be 20 meters high and 7 meters wide. So there's a volume there, but the amount of edge in that tree goes into hectares because of the way the leaf system is designed. Okay. We see it in mangrove swamps and coral reefs. So here we have an extreme edge environment. We have the meeting of fresh water, salt water, land and ocean. And that edge is increased as much as possible to enable that interface to cover the largest possible area. And mangroves and coral reefs are the highest energy and production systems on Earth. Okay. There's no ecosystem that is more productive. And you will see within mangroves are forest systems. Okay, they are forest systems. And all our great settlements are located on edges, if you think about it. They're on the land-ocean edge. The plains, mountains, rivers, land, desert, forest, underground resources, surface resources like Johannesburg, for example, forest and grasslands. Or multiple edges like Cape Town, mountain, plain, coast, ocean, warm current, cold current. Okay, so the more edge you have, meeting at one point, the higher your production levels are, the higher your potentials are. Okay, and so we see that humans have naturally always utilized this principle in the location of successful and effective settlements. And the reason is that we have high energy events on edges. Okay, and it's an edge of anything, system or medium, that the most interesting events take place. And design of edges in systems are critical to increase diversity, to increase dynamic, to increase exchange between elements in a system. Okay, and it also makes a system more resilient. And there are all sorts of interesting ways we can do it. There's just some rough examples. Here we have a straight path. There's a specific edge area here, but if we curve it in the same volume, we can have more edge, and we can increase that edge even more through keyhole path design. All right, and it gives us greater access and dynamic. Okay, and we can see this here in the design of a pond. The pond area is 100 square meters. The pond edge is 35 meters. By crelunating the edge like we see our lungs and intestines doing, we have the same pond area, but we've got an edge now of 70 meters. We've exponentially increased the productive capacity of not only the pond, but the land that is connected to it. And so there are all sorts of interesting ways that we can go about doing this that are pretty straightforward. Making use of vertical space, for example, increases the edge between the vertical and the horizontal. It's a very efficient way of utilizing space. And that brings in the principle of small, slow solutions. Okay, we can use walls, we can use fences, we can build trellises. Swales increase edge. They increase the edge between the mound and the trench. There's an edge environment there. Cool, damp, dry, warm. Okay, between the mound and the downslope. There's a different microclimate here to the microclimate on the other side. So we are creating dynamic opportunities for more variety of life to come into the system and take hold, because there are more niches available. It's that simple. Okay, and by valuing the marginal, what we are doing is we are taking elements that seem unimportant, and we are understanding the value that they contribute to the system, like microorganisms in the soil, for example. You don't see them, but they're there, they're functioning. And so the more we can increase them, these marginal elements, the healthier our soil will be, because we'll have a faster mineral cycle. So we'll have a faster turnover of materials from the organic back to nutrient. Worms in the soil. These are extremely important elements in the system, just as important as cattle and chickens and horses, fruit trees. They may not be as obvious, they're very marginal, they're out of sight, but they form a critical role in that ecological trophic pyramid. Okay, and we take this into culture as well. Right? All the great evolutions of human culture have been as a result of marginal people, marginal ideas. And those ideas, because they've been spearheaded by people stepping out of the mainstream, okay, and trying something new, have innovated something back into society that has transformed it for the better. It often takes a long time for it to be accepted, but eventually it is. Okay, so don't think that you are on the right track just because everybody else is taking that route. Often they are heading over a cliff, and that we need to take the less trodden path, because that will take us to something new, a new experience, a new dynamic that can transform ourselves and our systems. All right. And so permaculture, having arisen from the hippie movement in the late 1960s, and we saw that in the history of permaculture, is still very much a marginal system, but it's slowly gaining traction. Right now, we're living on the edges of society, but we are developing the future for humanity. We are pioneering a pathway to the next level of existence for humanity, which is not only going to guarantee our survival, but is going to transition us into thrivability. And it's often in these marginal places in the cities and settlements that we see permaculture systems taking hold and establishing themselves, and slowly they grow organically and become accepted into the mainstream. And the difference between the uptake of permaculture now and when I started is exponential. Catch and store energy, make hay while the sun shines. It's a very straightforward principle, very easy to understand, and it deals with the long-term storage of energy as a savings, okay, as a bank, to be used as an investment to build natural and human resources over time. Okay, and so it's up to us to identify and act upon opportunities to capture local flows of both renewable and non-renewable forms of energy and to store them, all right, effectively. So we have a resource base to provide us with an income to support our immediate needs and to support the evolution of the system into the future. All right. And so permaculture systems are systems of accumulation. We are designing energy accumulating systems. All right. Some aspects of permaculture design will be energy dissipating. We may be dissipating the impact of strong winds, for example, but that's a small aspect of the system. The overall objective of the system is to accumulate minerals, accumulate water, accumulate resources. Okay, so that permaculture systems are vectors of accumulation, and they accumulate more energy than they use to maintain themselves. And to accumulate effectively, we need harvesting and storage elements in the system. Okay, and here's a water harvesting infrastructure on a farm I designed. It's a dam with a swale that extends out across the farm and accumulates water into the dam to be used for irrigation. And this concept of make hay while the sun shines reminds us that opportunities for yield are not always there. You know, they come and go, and we need to be ready to optimize when they are there. Okay. So we have a limited time to catch and store energy before seasonal or episodic abundance dissipates, and so timing is everything. And in order to get our timing right, we need to observe and interact. All right, because if we observe and interact properly, we then can develop the appropriate infrastructures that we need to catch and store energy. And this is on our farm. This is us capturing the sunlight from the trees in the form of apricots and transforming them into dried apricots for storage so we can eat them over the year, because they're highly perishable, and if we don't do that, the opportunity is lost because they rot very quickly and get damaged. So catch and store energy begins with what we call harvesting elements, and they're any infrastructure that is, or element that is able to capture energy in multiple forms, such as swales, hard surfaces catching rainfall, plant leaves catching sunlight, solar panels catching sunlight, converting to electricity, roots capturing fertility, windmills capturing the energy of the wind, cattle capturing the energy of the pasture and the veldt. These are all harvesting elements. And they all tend to have a maximum surface area by virtue of extreme edge. Okay, this is where we bring in the principle of use edges and value the marginal. they need to be hardy and resilient. Okay, because the process of harvesting sometimes has got a high frictional interface. For example, a windmill. They reach out to the energy of the sun, to the elements of nature. They slow the movement, small, slow solutions, and catch them. All right? And then that captured energy needs to be transferred. It needs to go in a transit, okay, to a storage system. Okay, so this principle requires harvest, transit, and storage systems to work very well. And here we've got a good example. We've got the harvesting element of the roof, the transit element of the gutter and the downpipe, and the storage system of the rain tank. Okay. And so these elements are poised to make use of opportunities and niches in time to catch and store energy effectively. And so the more harvesting elements which are connected to multiple transit elements, which are connected to multiple storage elements your system has, the more abundant it will be. Okay, and a lot of this has just got to do with imagination and good design. And so a swale, for example, is a wonderful example of a harvest, transit, and storage system all in one. Okay, and that's just simply a contour ditch that harvests overland water flow, slows it down, small, slow solution, spreads it. Okay, so transits the water and sinks it into the earth for storage so that trees and vegetation systems can use it over time. Okay. And when we look at storage elements, there are numerous storage elements in systems. We can call them accumulation elements. And the more multifunctional they are, the more efficient they will be, and the more they will contribute to the abundance of the system. So we can see dams, which can also function as recreational areas, which can also function as aquaculture, and points of hydroelectricity generation. We've got batteries storing sunlight to be used overnight. We are storing the products of our gardens and food forests in the form of processed foods. Our houses are harvesting and storing sunlight in many different ways, for electricity, for water heating, for space heating. Okay. There are so many different storage elements. Plants in a garden are a storage element. Wood in a forest is a storage element. We can harvest those in the form of hay, oils, firewood, meat, milk. The entirety of a permaculture system is a harvesting, transit, and storage system. And the more efficient we can design that, the more productive we will be. So there are always opportunities for energy harvest, and we need to be aware through observe and interact what those are. Because if we miss those opportunities to catch and store energy at multiple levels, our systems become less abundant, less dynamic. So we are always observing and interacting and designing for events with huge catchment potential, like a flood, for example. And if we catch effectively, it will get us through a drought. And ultimately, permaculture systems are perennial, multi-layered, multi-element systems that catch and store sunlight for use by elements in their evolution. Okay. These forest archetypes that we design are the most effective harvesting of sunlight systems known. They are the most effective storage of transformed sunlight known. Okay. And that storage is extremely diverse, and it is long term. because trees are far more effective storage elements than annuals. Okay, and so the design of polycultures is your primary energy catchment and storage system. And that allows us to move into the next principle, which is obtain a yield. You can't work on an empty stomach. And obtain a yield reminds us that we should design any system to provide for self-reliance at all levels, okay, as our primary goal, by using captured and stored energy effectively to maintain the system, so to provide for its self-regulation and capture more energy for surplus. And so if you're not getting a yield, your system is not working. It's that simple. Okay, and yield needs to be immediate. You've got different scales of yield, but there has to be an immediate yield. There's no point in attempting to plant a forest for the grandchildren if we haven't got enough to eat today. And so that's where we start. And this is where the value of annual vegetables comes in. It provides an immediate yield, it provides immediate food, and it gives us the time to establish longer term harvesting and storage systems. Okay, and yield is very broad. It's not just about money and food. Okay, it takes multiple forms in terms of food itself, water, shelter, energy, time, yielding knowledge, yielding experience, the yield of the beauty of a permaculture system that you live in and day out. Yield is tied into all the resources we need to support our endeavor here on earth. Okay, so yield is extremely broad. And the best systems of yield are fast carbon pathways. Elements and systems that generate immediate yield will proliferate, while those that don't will wither. Okay, and this has been the basis of humanity's selection of domesticated species over history. Those that yield with the least energy inputs, with the highest energy outputs, the greatest level of utility, are the ones that become central to our cultural systems of life support. Okay. And so permaculture is based on the concept of multiple yields rather than just a few. And there are many harvests that can be put on the market in exchange for money, and there are many that can't. Okay, so there are yields that are focused on quality of life and spiritual evolution and personal well-being, and there are yields that are focused on sustenance. There are yields that are focused on providing warmth and heat in winter. There are yields that are of medicinal. Good design focuses on multiple yields, okay? And yields that focus on the evolution and growth of the practitioner as a conscious and responsible human being, embedded in the matrix of their own meaning, are critical, because we are not just here to survive, we are here to grow and improve and expand our consciousness. And this is where permaculture systems are very important, because they provide the context for that. That is a major yield. When you design and put a vegetable garden into existence, you have a yield of food at the end of it, but you have an incredible yield in the form of learning and knowledge and health in the process of doing that, and that is immeasurable. And so therefore you cannot measure yield purely in terms of financial value. That is a self-defeating concept that oversimplifies the value of life itself and the way it's lived. And people will say to me, oh, you put all this work in just for a few tomatoes. I say, no. One of the yields of all this work are a few tomatoes. But at the same time, I'm outdoors, I'm in the sun, my hands are in the soil, I'm learning about nature, I'm learning about myself, I'm getting good exercise. Just a few of them. I have the satisfaction of putting food in my tummy that is the fruit of my own labor. Okay, and the vitality of that food in its direct relationship to me is immeasurable. And ultimately, yield supports what we call a rewards-based evolution. A yield profit or an income functions as a reward that encourages and maintains and replicates the system that generated the yield. Okay, so if you're failing to get a yield, you will stop. You will run out of steam. You will run out of resources. You will run out of inspiration. But if you are successful, it generates within yourself motivation to keep going. Okay, and in this way, a successful system spread. And it just brings us back to cannabis, which is why cannabis has become such a powerful part of human culture, because the rewards of growing cannabis are so great, not only from a recreational perspective, from a medicinal perspective, from a raw material perspective, which can be channeled into a high value economy that provides for a huge range of human needs. It's the fact that this plant is so easy to grow under all conditions and has a beneficial effect on the ecosystem around it. There's just so much yield value from it. It's become an essential part of our culture. Despite all attempts of the mainstream to get rid of it, it's not only still here, it's grown in importance and it's transformed the system because it's now been legalized all around the world. Okay, so a lot of people grow it because the rewards are high. And so this is what obtaining a yield is all about. It's about an incentive to keep evolving and an incentive to select certain elements over other elements. And it's a way we know how to accept positive feedback and accept negative feedback, to let go of that which does not work and to strengthen that which does. And that brings us to our final principle: produce no waste. Okay, and this sits right at the end of the 12 principles, because it's all about recycling, creating closed loop cycles. Okay, it's all about reducing and removing waste from a system, and there are two adages there that are very important in regard to this. A stitch in time saves 9, waste not, want not, and we'll look at it. Okay, and so this principle brings together traditional values of frugality. Okay, living within our means. It's the small, slow solutions principle coming in. It's the apply self-regulation and accept feedback principle coming in. It focuses on the care of material goods, looking after things, recycling all we can. It's about the concern for pollution. And it's about transforming that concern into the more radical perspective that sees wastes as a resource and as opportunities. All right? And there's no such thing as a polluting item. You can't say, well, this is pollution and not pollution. Pollution is an output of any system component. Okay, so the output of any element that is not being used productively by any other component of the system. So if there's an element and it's got an output and it can't be absorbed as a need by another element in the system, it is pollution. Because if it can't be taken up by the system, it will destroy the system. For example, if the apricots that fall off the trees and land on the ground are not consumed by pigs or chickens, they become a problem because they host fruit fly. And those fruit fly then attack all the healthy fruit on your trees. Okay, and so those apricots lying on the ground rotting are pollution. Even though they may increase the soil fertility over time, it's not the most efficient way of doing that, because the problems that bring about outweigh the benefit of increasing soil fertility over time. Okay, and so this definition encourages us to look at ways to minimize pollution and waste through designing closed loop systems. Systems that make use of all outputs from all elements in a way that provides for all the needs of the system internally. Okay, and so all this plastic and all these tires that are burning and polluting the atmosphere and polluting the beaches are just simply elements that have not been used effectively in a closed loop way. Plastic can be recycled, tires can be turned into roads, and certain types of elements should never be made in the first place. But there's still ways of doing it. Thin plastics can be put into plastic bottles and used as eco-bricks, for example. But we need to change the way our system manufactures things. And that's another story we'll look at a little bit later. All right, so this principle of creating closed loop cycles in a system, as we can see, is all about enabling self-regulation. It enables systems to generate their own resources from within rather than relying on external inputs. So if we return all the vegetable waste back to the gardens instead of throwing them away, we will improve soil fertility. Or if we take those vegetables and put it into a compost heap, or if we feed it to chickens and put the chickens on the soil in the garden so that they poo and work the poo into the garden, we increase fertility so the next generation of plants will grow even more healthily than the one before. Okay, and so the equation is simple. The more closed loop cycles you can create in a system, the more efficient and productive it will be. It's very simple. It's all about the imagination of the designer. Okay. What we are going for are self-contained systems that exchange energy with systems around them. In closed loop cycles, they do not bleed energy. They're not linear, okay? They're not entropic, they are syntropic. And so outputs from one element are transformed as a resource for another, okay? And so any system that cannot reabsorb or deploy surplus, any form of surplus, will enter into chaos. And so what we can do is we can process waste into useful resources by transformation elements in a design. Okay, so we have to have transformation elements. And so, for example, here's a transformation element. These are pigs in our system eating fruit fly infected apricots, eating kitchen waste, transforming that into pigs. And pigs have multiple benefits. They can build soils, they can clear land, they can provide meat. So the more of these translators we have integrated into our system, so the more cycles we have, the more resources we have, and therefore the more energy we have to evolve our systems and to access as yields. All right. Chickens are wonderful translators. They translate weeds into fertility, into meat, into eggs. So it's all about how we see things. And if we start seeing elements as translators, then we can start linking them up into flows of energy in our systems, and we can transform those flows of energy into constantly higher value streams. And this proverb or statement, waste not, want not, is critical. And this ties back to the principle of catch and store energy. Okay, it reminds us that it's easy to be wasteful when there's abundance, but that waste can cause later hardship, like here, this watering of pathways and of lawns and public spaces that are not productive is leading to a reduction in the water cycle, okay, which dehydrates landscapes, and it drops the reserve of water available for drought. And the statement, a stitch in time saves 9, reminds us of the value of maintenance and looking after things, okay, and repairing and fixing. We've got a problem in our society where technology we produce now just cannot be repaired. They're so inbuilt that you can't open them up and fix them. They break, they get thrown away, they're pollution. You have to buy a new one. It's a waste of money as well as a waste of a resource, and the end result is pollution. Okay, so it's very important that not only do we look after our tools and technology, that we buy high quality at the same time, because high quality lasts, high quality is easy to use, and high quality is not going to let us down when we need it the most. Because if your piece of cheap crap technology fails at a critical moment, it can cause massive amounts of loss. Like a cheap fridge failing when it's full of harvested meat from your system is a good example. Okay, and so this brings us to the concept of the permaculture principles as a whole. Okay, what we're dealing with here is, as I stated at the beginning of this presentation, into principles. We're dealing with one principle, okay, of ecosystemicism, and that principle of ecosystemicism is one pattern with many different iterations. Okay, they're different faces of the same thing, and if you understand permaculture principles well, which you will by the end of this course, you will realize that embedded in every single principle is all the others. Okay, you will see, for example, catch and store energy also embodies obtain a yield. It embodies pattern to detail. It embodies observe and interact. If you want to establish good catchment, transit and storage elements, you have to have good observational skills, gather data on your environment. Okay, you need to apply self-regulation and accept feedback. You need to take the positive and negative feedback and adapt your systems so that they produce no waste, and so on. All right, so we become very fluid with these concepts, and so as we can see in life, the same pattern exists on all scales. Permaculture principles exist on all scales. Okay, they're just different iterations of the same pattern, and all principles have to be applied simultaneously. You can't pick and choose here. Okay, permaculture is a holographic pattern. If we observe each principle, we will see its reflection in the other 11 principles. If we observe any aspect of a well-designed permaculture system, we will see all 12 principles present. Okay. And so this is the holographic nature of permaculture design, as a reflection of the natural order. We see the same thing expressed on multiple scales and multiple levels. Whatever we look at, we see the ethics and we see their principles embodied. Okay, so we are dealing with a system of holographic scaling here, where each principle is critical to the realization and actualization of self-regulation towards abundance and thrivability. And that means, at the end of the day, that permaculture is the universal abundance fractal unleashed.